Right, good evening everybody. I hope you can hear me at the back there. If you can, wave your hand just to let me know you. Jolly good, thank you very much. Right, welcome to the first planning committee meeting of the new calendar year. My name's Steve Drury. As you can see at the front, I'm chairing this meeting. I have officers on both sides of me, planning officers and what would you call yourself? Support officers. Yes, committee clerk. So there's a couple of things I need to read out, but I will do that in a second. I'm first of all going to ask Sarah here if we have any apologies for absence.
Through you, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Alison Scarth, and the named substitute member for the meeting tonight for Councillor Scarth is Councillor Giles Medhurst. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome, Stephen. Thank you very much for taking Alison's place this evening. It's very good of you. I'd also like to welcome Ruth Clark at the end there, newly elected councillor, and she's decided to join us on planning committee. What else was I going to say? Nothing. I think everybody's here. Right, so item 2, the minutes of the last meetings, to confirm as a correct record of the minutes of the planning committee meeting held on 22nd of April 2021. Does anybody have anything to add, take away or change? I see no hands, so I will sign those at some point in the evening. It's nice to actually sign a set of minutes rather than say I will do it when I come into the office. Item 3, notice of other business. Sarah, is there notice of other business?
Through you, Chair, we've had two items that have been withdrawn. That is item number 7, 173 Abbots Road, and also item number 13, which is Christmas Tree Farm. Those applications have been withdrawn.
Thank you very much. Item 4, declaration of interests. Before I go any further, I have a short statement to read. And it says, all members are reminded that they should come to meetings with an open mind and be able to demonstrate that they are open-minded. You should only come to your decision after due consideration of all the information provided, whether by planning officers in the introduction, by applicants or agents, by objectors or by fellow councillors. The committee report in itself is not the sole piece of information to be considered. Prepared speeches to be read out are not a good idea. They might suggest that you have already firmly made up your mind about an application before hearing any additional information provided on the night, and they will not take account of information provided on the night. You must always avoid giving the impression of having firmly made up your mind in advance, no matter that you might be predisposed to any view. And I'm just going to make another short statement. There are 2 items on the agenda this evening, which are items 11 and 12, I believe, and Liberal Democrat councillors are going to declare a non-pecuniary interest on items 11 and 12. Members of the committee were not personal friends of the councillor who was acting as an agent on the application and did not feel there was any conflict of interest. Thank you. Councillor Tankard.
Chair, Councillor John Tankard here. I'm declaring a declaration of interest on items 11 and 12 on the agenda as the agent. I will be speaking on Article 6, and after that I will leave the building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. As Chairman of the Planning Committee of Watford Rural Parish Council, there's no items on the agenda tonight, but I declare that I've come here with an open mind, and no, I'm not bound by the views of the Parish Council. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the planning applications that we have in front of us this evening then. Oh, Councillor Bedford, sorry. Okay. Right, item 5 is the demolition of existing buildings for residential development comprising 2-storey houses, 3-storey blocks of flats, 160 dwellings in total, together with car parking, landscaping and other associated works, at Killingdown Farm, Little Green Lane, Croxley Green. Rickmansworth, Hertfordshire, WD3 3JJ. And I see Councillor Bedford's got a hand up. Before, can I just hear officer updates first? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just to advise that we've had one further objection letter. It reiterates objections which are set out in the committee report, namely that the amended plans do not overcome the concerns, including in relation to the use of Little Green Lane to access the development, the impact on the conservation area, and the impact on the amenities of the occupiers of number 5 Little Green Lane. Just in relation to the amended plans, in terms of the changes since the application was previously before members in February, just to highlight these on the drawings in front of you, they relate to increased hedge retention at the main entrance to the site, with plot 2 having been adjusted to accommodate this. The increased head retention to the southern cul-de-sac fronting the green. This is through the rotation of plots 153 and 160 to face onto the cul-de-sac, and the footpath has also been adjusted to run along the inside of the hedge at this point. And the third amendment relates to plot 26, which has been set further from the boundary to provide increased separation distance to number 5 Little Green Lane. There's no further updates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. We've looked at this planning application. Now this is the third time at this committee, and I think most of us are quite aware of the application and of its ins and outs. 3 months ago, when this came to committee, I proposed that we defer the application in order to obtain an independent highways report to substantiate the highways issues and dangers that most of us, including especially local councillors and residents in Croxley, are only too aware of. Sadly, that report did not give this council the official seal on those highways issues that we believe are a danger, and I believe that we must therefore discount highway safety from the reasons why we believe this application is not right for the site, even though our personal views of that have almost certainly not changed. I could give a very long treatise on this site, on the suitability and otherwise of this planning application, and the accordance with the Council's planning policies. I am, however, aware that this is not the place for a sermon and this is not a TED talk, and there are others who will wish to speak after me and make their own points. So I'd just like to state that any points I don't make and are omitted from my comments are left out for reasons of time and brevity and not because I don't think they're important. I won't be arguing against the principle of the development itself. That ship sailed more than 7 years ago. However, when the local plan inspector launched that ship, allocating the site in the previous local plan, he made an important statement. He said that the site was able to deliver a significant housing whilst maximising the scope for sensitivity vis-à-vis the conservation area. That, of course, assumed that the access would be by the originally proposed Grove Crescent and not that proposed in this application of Little Green Lane. I know there has been some concern from residents as to why Three Rivers as landowners have not suggested the use of Grove Crescent as an access. The truth is that Grove Crescent location for accessing the site was proposed several years ago, long before Hill were on the scene, in talks with the previous long-term owner of Killingdown Farm. The current developer has made no effort to take up this access until I'm told earlier this month. Even now, Hill are not committed to using the access at all, let alone for the entirety of the vehicular traffic. To me, the whole case around this application hinges on 2 points. Firstly, would the development cause harm to the conservation area? And secondly, can this harm be mitigated, or is it outweighed by the public benefit? I'm not going to rehearse the case for the existence or importance of the conservation area, either in general or this specific conservation area, nor their contributions to our lives and our communities, which are huge. We mess with them at our peril. They do not belong to us, but to those who went before and those who will live here after we have gone, and we must respect that. And so I find that having looked at this now for the third time, I come down on the side of supporting the findings of less than substantial harm that this development will cause to the conservation area. For members of the public, that's a technical term and not one that minimises the harm caused to the conservation area in any way. and the reasons for that are almost entirely around the access due to be created from Little Green Lane. By widening a small lane and hugely increasing the amount of traffic using the lane, the development will urbanise this semi-rural area. By removing the hedgerow and creating greater access, this development would tear a wound and leave a permanent scar in the conservation area. In addition, the large houses proposed here, fronting majestically onto Little Green Lane and looking across the green, would totally change the character of the area, and not for the good. The only reason that Hill want the access onto Little Green Lane is to increase the land value, saleability and profit. There is nothing wrong with that per se, but not at the expense of the conservation area, hundreds of years of history and the community of Croxley Green. I now have to consider whether the public benefit of the new homes outweighs the harm to the conservation area, and I find this quite simple. There is no doubt that new homes are needed in this area and beyond, but there is a very simple way to provide these homes and the public benefit they bring by forming the sole vehicular access from Grove Crescent and leaving the current access onto Little Green Lane for pedestrians and cyclists only, and I call that a win-win. And so I would like to propose that this application is refused and give some brief reasons for refusal that I expect the officers will want to add to. I believe these are fully defendable should the applicant go to appeal, rather than, as we all hope, seek to engage in discussion to reach a scheme that everyone can live with. So reason one concerns that the proposed development, by reasons of form, scale and layout, along the site's western edge, would detract from the overall appearance of the wider landscape and result in less than substantial harm to the setting and significance of the Croxley Green Conservation Area and Grade 2 listed buildings. And that the loss of hedgerow to facilitate the new and widened vehicular access and the widening of Little Green Lane, together with the intensification of vehicular use of Little Green Lane, would also result in a detrimental urbanising impact, and this would further exacerbate the harmful impact on the rural character and appearance of the Croxley Green Conservation Area and result in less than substantial harm to the setting of the conservation area. And it is considered that the identified harm is not considered to be outweighed by public benefits, and the proposed development is therefore contrary to policy CP1 of the core strategy, to the Croxley Green Conservation Area appraisal, and paragraph 196 of the NPPF. Secondly, I have been concerned and convinced of the effect on plot 26 on the existing dwelling, so I propose a second reason for refusal, which is that the proposed development on plot 26, by virtue of its siting, mass and design, and proximity to the western boundary, would result in an overbearing and visually intrusive and unneighbourly form of development to the detriment of the residential amenities of the occupiers of number 5 Little Green Lane, and the development would therefore be contrary to policies CP1 and CP12. And finally, of course, refusal will leave us necessarily without the required Section 106 agreement. And so a third reason for refusal will need to be shaped around that in order to maximise sustainable travel options, a travel plan and financial contribution towards supporting the implementation, processing and monitoring of a travel plan is required, and that in the absence of a signed agreement under provisions of Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act, the development fails to meet this requirement. I'm sure that the officers can help to make these rounder and add the relevant policies. I realise that this will cause disappointment to the applicant, but I really feel that there is a way for development to go ahead on this allocated site without causing the harm to the Little Green Lane and the conservation area, together with the hedgerow and the road itself, that we are all too worried about. Thank you.
Next.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me? Right. As a resident of Croxley Green, I have known this location for many years. I will try not to repeat the points that the previous speaker has made, but some of them I do need to touch on. For me, the issue of highways, I met with the County Highways Officer and yourself, Chair, and our officer. I am still amazed that we have no highway objection, but as we do not, I concur with the point made by Councillor Bedford that cannot be used. But having also requested the accident statistics for that junction, I am sure that if that junction were to be used, the number of accidents would increase. There have also, because of increasing deliveries, people use that lane trying to get to Canterbury Way and then try to go down an unmade up road. So I am of the view that that road should be, from the pond to the school, should be closed to vehicular traffic apart from emergency and farm vehicles. The conservation area is obviously a key point, and I won't repeat the points, but I'm sure other speakers will make. The conservation area, the hedges have been particularly important for other applications that we've had on the green. The impact of widening the road, putting in lighting, putting in a footpath would change the very more rural part of the green, which is used by cyclists, walkers, runners, and people for other leisure interests. I've seen muntjac deer when I have gone down there, and I have had thank you to everybody who has emailed me, commenting on wildlife and many other aspects of this application. I'd like to thank the officer for their 99-page report, and obviously some of the members of the public will be saying, well, that hasn't even covered all the issues we wanted. But, that I think is a good summary of the issues before us. And obviously for those of you who've walked around the site, it is a site, because of what happened 7 years ago, will have housing on it. I just don't feel that taking into balance that the impact of the current application on the conservation area is such that, having weighed the evidence and looked at the different issues, I would be comfortable to second refusal on the grounds given. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other hands from committee members? Councillor Morris first. Okay.
Thank you. I just want to make a point about process here. You said at the start of the meeting that members should not come with prepared speeches. It didn't look like one of the members here had followed that advice, and I am concerned about how this plays out to the public and all parties in this application. I do have comments to make on the application itself, but if we do have speakers, I think it appropriate to hear them first. I don't have questions to ask speakers or officers at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire, would you like to? You can wait. Okay. We do have 5 speakers this evening. We have Parish Council member and 2 District Council members. But first, I'd like to ask Mr. Anthony Britton, who is speaking against this item, to come up to the table and put his points across. Thank you, Anthony. And just before you start, I'd just like to say, purely to the security guy at the back, as I have mentioned, if I do stand up, it doesn't mean the meeting is suspended. It just means I can't see who's speaking or what they're saying properly. Thank you anyway.
Good evening, everybody. I'm just trying to get the tone right on this. Is that okay? Am I being timed, Mr. Chairman? May I start?
Yes, you are. You do have 3 minutes,
yeah,
and you will be warned when you have 30 seconds left, if that's okay with you. Thank you.
Thank you. In 2014, the Government Planning Inspector decided that the site be developed for housing. Quote, delivering significant housing while maximising the scope for sensitivity vis-à-vis the conservation area. The current recommendation is not in accordance with the Government Inspector's report. It is not a public benefit or sensitive for the setting of a listed building in the conservation area to be harmed in any way, or for hedges and trees protected by statutes screening the green to be removed, or for a rural lane to be widened to accommodate road access for 160 dwellings, including trophy homes breaching hedges when there is an alternative access solution. The key point in the current planning officer's report is that conservation area harm is considered to be outweighed by the public benefits of new homes. We, as in thousands of Croxley residents, TRDC's external heritage expert, and the author of the BSA Heritage Report, do not agree. But that conservation area harm could simply be mitigated and houses be built by accessing the site via Grove Crescent garages owned by TRDC, thereby retaining the entire hedgerow along Little Green Lane, retaining the rural lane at its present width. This would provide a safer junction with Baldwin's Lane, provide a road width consistent with the servicing of up to 160 houses, and bring placemaking and community cohesion into the plan. It must be understood that adopting both options, Crescent and the Lane as accesses, with the latest idea of even splitting the estate into two, would be socially divisive and completely misses the point on conservation. Just because Hill, according to TRDC Property Department, and I quote, wishes to maximise the land value by coming in off Little Green Lane is no reason for profit to triumph over conservation. Hill acknowledged this motive to
30 seconds remaining.
To many of us at a recent site meeting. We have it from TRDC Property, and I quote, from a planning perspective, it would be better to link the site surrounding the development by coming off Grove Crescent so shops, etc. could be accessed by the whole community. Grove Crescent does bring public benefit and the opportunity to enhance. Dual public benefit can be satisfied in providing new homes and at the same time conserving the conservation area by rejecting this application. Such an outcome would enable Hill to submit an alternative application.
Thank you.
One that would...
Mr. Britton, thank you. That's 3 minutes. Unfortunately, you haven't finished, but 3
one
minutes
that the
are up.
community would support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're just going to wait a second or so while the microphone and everything over there is actually wiped over. Thank you very much, Sarah. Right, speaking on behalf of the item is Mr. Glyn Mutton. Again, you will have 3 minutes, sir, and you will be warned after when you have 30 seconds left, if that's okay. Thank you. You can start, and we will be timed from then.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Thank you. We are aware that the site has been subject to intense public scrutiny and that local residents place great value in this location and hold strong views on proposed changes in their local environment. Our intention has always been to create a positive impact through the design and provision of much-needed homes, the quality and landscape and open spaces, and the jobs and contributions to wider infrastructure the new development facilitates. Whilst we endeavour to find a solution that finds agreement, we've also sought to apply the local plan objectives and policy together with the constraints of the site in order to find an appropriate balance. We recognise that the site falls partly within the conservation area and close to listed buildings, and these factors were considered during the allocation process, where a degree of harm as a result of development was accepted by the council in allocating the site. The access was not finalised as part of this allocation, and it has been the topic of discussion since pre-application stage in December 2019. Throughout the application, feedback from the local community and the 2 previous planning committee meetings have altered the proposals further, as highlighted by the case officer. Many of the benefits of the scheme include the 45% affordable homes of 72 homes, together with a broad range of homes for sale on the open market. All homes would exceed national space standards across all tenures. The energy performance of homes has significantly increased in excess of policy requirements and has been designed from a fabric-first approach, focusing on improving thermal performance and reducing energy demand before the inclusion of air source heat pumps as renewable heating technology. Provision for electric vehicle charging points has also been made for all homes. 10% of the space will be provided as dedicated public open space, incorporating new children's play area and opening up new connections and improvements to the existing public footpath network around the site. All Category A and B trees will be retained and over 120 new trees proposed, together with new hedgerows and shrub planting. Whilst hedgerow removal has been reduced, the project would still deliver a 9.7% net gain in terms of biodiversity as measured by the DEFRA metric 2.0. Whilst we acknowledge the change that this development would bring to the local area, we are also aware of the pressing local need for new homes, especially of affordable tenure. We sought to mitigate impacts where possible and go beyond many of the requirements of the local plan to deliver much-needed homes of high quality on this allocated site.
30 seconds remaining.
That's it. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you very much indeed for keeping to time. Now we have two district councillors who are sitting at the back of the hall there, and I will take them in preference over Parish Councillor Chris Mitchell, purely because they are district councillors. So, first of all, I have Councillor Margaret Hoffman. Again, Margaret, you'll have 3 minutes and you will be timed and you will get 30-second warning, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. As Councillor for Dickinson's ward, I state as follows. The latest officer report states that the heritage objection is a strong objection. Our own heritage officer says that despite its allocation, the redevelopment of the site to provide 160 dwellings is fundamentally harmful. As the application site uses only parts of the allocation site, the numbers should be reduced to mitigate the harm. The addition of land off-site for flood mitigation also distorts the density. The proposed new building to the rear of the listed cottages at 123 The Green should be removed from the scheme as it is too close to the boundaries and its access opens up the hedge. The inspector at the time of the allocation said that the development would need to relate to the conservation area and the listed building. Clearly, it doesn't, and the listed farmhouse has just been omitted from the application area. This does not represent proper planning, and it's contrary to the objectives of the site allocation. The access should be from Grove Crescent, where the highway infrastructure already exists and does not need further alteration. Three Rivers Council are open to any discussions with Hill regarding access from Grove Crescent. This would allow us to protect the conservation area and the green and provide opportunities for more cohesive community facilities. The objections to the Little Green access is more than about highways. It is a matter of the permanent harm that physical alterations and the traffic will do to the character of the green. The road and junction widening and street lighting, etc., will result in a suburban appearance which is alien to a setting enjoyed by generations of our community. Once gone, it will be lost forever. Any access from the lane must be very limited to such numbers as can be accommodated without any changes whatsoever to the hedgerow and the green. The principal vehicle access must be from Grove Crescent. This application is insensitive to Croxley Green and
30
its
seconds
community.
remaining.
As such, I ask the committee to refuse it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sikowski, could I ask you to put forward any new points that you have rather than reiterate some of the things we've already heard, as we are here, time restrained this evening. Thank you. You will also have 3 minutes.
Okay. Firstly, can I say how great it is, how many residents have been engaged with this and how many objections we've received. It's just been a really good show of resident engagement. When I spoke at the previous planning committee in February, I raised 4 concerns regarding this application. The first one was the proximity of plot 26 of 5 Little Green. Second, damage to the conservation area. Third, damage caused by construction traffic. And fourth, that vehicle access should be changed to be via Grove Crescent. Unfortunately, the changed application does nothing to address my concerns over access and construction traffic. Very little has been done to address concerns about the conservation area. The changes to plot 26 were insufficient. It is still overbearing on 5 Little Green, and if it were an extension, it would be inconsistent with historic Three Rivers planning decisions. It should simply be removed. I will briefly add that hill developers need to seriously engage with Three Rivers to change the entire vehicle access to be via Grove Crescent. May I remind members that it is already the view of Three Rivers District Council that the entire vehicle access should be via Grove Crescent. And briefly, the three important reasons why is the traffic flow would be much better and sustainable via Grove Crescent. Second, it would be significantly better for the conservation area and remove nearly all the negative impact on the historic Little Green Lane. And lastly, the benefits to placemaking and to community cohesion are hugely increased. So to conclude, I reiterate and stand by all my concerns that I raised at the previous meeting, and I call for this application to be rejected on conservation area grounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Morris from the committee. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Again, Chris.
Okay, I'll start. The Parish Council sent a letter objecting to the latest revisions 11th of May. This application is not acceptable for all the reasons you've been hearing so far. Please refuse this application. Ask your officers to work with Hill to get a better design, especially on the access. The independent highways engineer measured the width of the road, and by making it a 4.8 metre wide road, the footpath has to be reduced to 1.45 metres rather than the 2 metres. We think this is unsatisfactory. The sight lines from the junction of Little Green Lane onto Baldwin's Lane are very poor. I know this has been mentioned, but we consider it a very dangerous junction, and we don't believe this has been dealt with properly. This is a village green in the green belt and a conservation area. Access via Little Green Lane is simply not acceptable for this size of development. So we therefore still object to the use of Little Green Lane, as all the rest of you are. Councillor Hoffman, thank you very much, has spoken to the Three Rivers property team. It's clear there has been discussion about the access through Grove Crescent going back through the years. So this is how the site was originally going to be accessed in the allocations document approved by the planning inspector in 2014. Three Rivers website actually states all applications for planning permission are considered from the conservation point of view and can be refused on conservation grounds alone. This applies to planning applications not only in the conservation area itself, but also in the vicinity. Permission or consent should be granted only on a proposal if a proposal enhances or preserves the character or appearance of the conservation area. This application clearly does not do that. We share the Conservation Officer's concern about the impact on the area, including the heritage buildings, as has been discussed already, and we agree with the findings in the report of the Tetrick planning regarding the scale of the housing contained within the conservation area. We support the views in the report of the Bridget Shepherd report, which states the character and appearance of the conservation area will not be preserved nor enhanced by this development. The proposal will be particularly detrimental to specific parts of it. One other issue I want to bring up again is the mix of the housing should more accurately reflect the Three Rivers and Local Strategic Housing Market Assessment and the Neighbourhood Policy Plan Policy H01 for more units for the elderly who do not want to leave Croxley Green and want to downsize and starter homes for the young. We don't need large executive houses. So following the planning inspector's guidance, the conservation reports, we request you refuse on conservation area grounds, and so it enhances it, not destroying it, and change the access. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to the speeches, I've read the reports, I've read the emails from residents, of which there have been very many, and I come here without a prepared text, but I come here with strong feelings. I spoke at length at the February meeting about the impact of this scheme on the conservation area and heritage assets. And at the end of my speech, you, Chair, commented that it was the Debbie Morris show. And I'm really pleased that members opposite, district councillors for the ward and parish councillors have taken on board everything that I said at the last meeting about the conservation area, the impact and the impact on heritage assets of this scheme, and are now joining my reasoning as to why this scheme should be refused. There is one thing I want to add to what I said at the last meeting and what I just said, and I'm going to quote from a resident's email to me because I felt that it summed up the situation perfectly and it resonated with me. So I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from it, which is this. Hill's proposed development, of which a considerable percentage sits in conservation area, stands to permanently break the unarguable physical and historical link between the Grade 2 listed buildings of Killingdown Farm and the farm workers' cottages in Little Green Lane, a connection which extends beyond bricks and mortar. The fields that sit between these listed buildings are as much an integral part of the conservation area landscape as the houses themselves, linking buildings which have provided context for each other for over 400 years and have remained in plain view of each other across those fields since the day they were built. The unique conservation area of Little Green and Killingdown Farm, linked by Little Green Lane and flanked by Green Belt, its listed buildings, its walled lanes, its ancient hedgerows, open fields and thriving well-established ecosystems teeming with wildlife are not mutually exclusive. They are inextricably linked, historically, environmentally and aesthetically. Beautifully worded, and it sums it all up. I support the refusal.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morris. I wasn't chair when I mentioned it being the Debbie Morris show. I am chair now, and I wouldn't dream of saying it again. I'd just like to bring in Claire, one of the officers here, before I come to Stephen Giles Medhurst and then Raj.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, making notes and listening to the debate, but I just wanted to raise a few points and just a few points of clarification. With regards to the site allocations document, this does not specify that access must be from Grove Crescent. The master plans prepared during the allocation process do indicate access from Grove Crescent, but this is an indicative master plan and indicates how a site could be developed to accommodate development. There is no requirement for any subsequent planning application to reflect an indicative master plan. So just wanted to clarify on that point. Obviously, points have been raised about highway safety, but I think that members have also noted the independent report and therefore that there is no support from County Council Highways Authority or the independent report for a highways refusal. With regards to the impact on number 5 Little Green Lane, obviously this was something that the applicant took away when the application was previously at committee in February, and as I set out at the update at the beginning, they have made changes so that the building on plot 26, both the detached garage and also the dwelling, are set a significant distance from that boundary. Obviously, officers raised no objection to the initial scheme, but even additional spacing has been created to the boundary and therefore maintained the view that there would not be demonstrable harm to occupiers of number 5 Little Green Lane. With regards to conservation impacts in terms of development on the western edge and also the access and road widening, essentially the officer report identifies that there's less than substantial harm, so it comes down to the fact that this needs to be weighed against public benefits, and obviously as set out in the report, officers consider that there are public benefits that outweigh that less than substantial harm. Obviously members may attach different weight to the public benefits and therefore conclude differently, but obviously the site is allocated and the allocation does not preclude development from within the part of the site which is within the conservation area. And just obviously turning to the planning balance as a whole, as set out at the end of the report, I think it's section 7.21 of the committee report, the local planning authority cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, which means that paragraph 11 of the MPPF is engaged. This requires that there should be a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and therefore if members were minded to refuse planning permission, they must be clear that the adverse impacts that they have identified either less than substantial harm to the conservation area, which isn't outweighed by public benefits, and harm to neighbouring amenity. You need to be clear that those significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when we're assessing the policies in the MPPF as a whole. And just with regards to the access, I think the point is just to make lots of discussion about there could be a different access or an alternative access or a better access. Our role is to consider the application before us, and is that acceptable, and not. It's not about, would something else that was different work better, or, we're considering the application before us now, and as set out in the officer report, there is no highways objection, and we consider that there are public benefits. But I hear the points that members raised. With regards to the points about the footpath, the footpath is 2 metres wide in most places. It's reduced in a couple of places at pinch points to a lower amount, but those exceed the county council standards. So at all points, the footpath would be an appropriate width. And with regards to the housing mix, that has been reviewed by housing colleagues at TRDC who are supportive, and as has been set out, it's also providing 45% affordable housing. There's no further points at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Giles Medhurst.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I first read these papers, particularly the comments from the Heritage Officer, and then read at the bottom this is recommended for grant, quite frankly, I was staggered. Because if anything, if that was the real reason for the issues, as has been indicated by eloquently by Councillor Hoffman in particular, and others, no, it's the heritage issue and the effect on the conservation area here that is crux to this, as well as actually the desecration of the hedgerow. Now, I note what the officer said in terms of the indicative master plan and the public inquiry that decided that this site, and indeed 2 others, both of which were in my ward and have now been fully developed, were taken, which we objected to as an authority, being in the local plan at the time, were taken out and decided on back of submissions by the developer to be sites for development. Now, that master plan would have featured in the inspector's mind as an indicative proposal. Now, obviously, he's not indicated it has to be from Grove Crescent, but clearly it would have been a factor with his in consideration, the same way as it was in terms of the Woodside Road site, that a school was going to be built there. Well, it's never been built yet, and we don't know if it'll ever be built. Again, a factor for taking the Woodside Road site out of the green belt and allowing it for development. And I suspect that might have been a factor in the inspector's mind at the time. And clearly, in terms of the way the residents quite rightly have viewed this, it's that is the preferred access. Now, even if that were not necessarily the preferred access, I go back to Little Green Lane. I don't know this area quite as well, obviously, as residents who live there or indeed the ward members, but actually I have a similar site elsewhere within my area which has a hedgerow, very narrow, has no footway along the roadside itself. And actually, if you took that hedgerow out, you urbanised it with street lighting, you urbanised it with a footway, you completely changed the nature. It's no longer a rural country lane featuring in terms of Croxley Green and the green area. It becomes an urban environment and it changes completely the nature. And that's the way I have read this report. And quite frankly, I was surprised that actually the benefits outweigh the complete change and the effect on Killingdown Farm itself and the change on the conservation area. Now, clearly, the owners of the site and developers have it within their power and ability to secure this site for a substantial development of its nature. I don't particularly like the executive homes either, but I know that's the way they want to go. But we can't actually change that until we change some of our planning policies, which are going out to consultation soon. But they have the ability to actually still develop this site to a similar nature by actually one fundamental change. And I hope they will take on board the comments that everyone has made so far about this. Yes, it is clearly going to be developed because that's what's happened in 2014. We lost that particular argument about this site. But please take on board what's been said, both at this meeting and clearly at previous meetings which I was not present at. But in particular, we need to safeguard this type of facility in terms of the community and the conservation area. So I fully support the refusal, as has been indicated.
Thank you very much. Councillor Corroya.
Thank you, Chair. I came to this meeting with an open mind. I've read the report, I've heard the speakers, and I'd like to say I would like to compliment the officer for a very comprehensive report. But I think the issue here is we cannot just ignore the 346 objectives. Moreover, we've all been getting all these emails. And to be frank with you, this is where the voice of the people in Croxley Green should be heard. I think it is equally important that we take into account the Croxley Green neighbourhood plan. We cannot ignore that either. I remain unconvinced that the harm is outweighed by the public benefit, and I support that this application should be rejected. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I was brought up in Croxley Green, and like the Chairman and another councillor on this council, my school backed on to Little Green Lane. And it's 50 years ago this year that I started that school, and that was when I first knew Little Green Lane. Fell in love with it. And when I was 11, 12, 13, going back a long way, we were able to hare down there on our bikes. There's lots of other kids, all the way from the top, all the way down to Rousbarn. It's perfectly safe, nothing at all until you got to Canterbury Way, and there was next to nothing then. And then when my kids were born in the late 80s, early 90s, it was an area we could walk them. It was nice and safe, and we could use the whole of it and come off the green. A fantastic area. My wife and I walk there frequently. We did that before we had a pooch, and now we walk the dog up there. And in October, we will be welcoming our first grandchild. Now, if this goes through, we won't have the opportunity, as will nobody else, to enjoy walking down there from top to bottom with no traffic. It will completely ruin the character of the conservation area at that point. Once gone, it will never return. And I'd like to think that an 11-year-old cycling down there today, in 50 years, can walk their grandchildren down there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hayward.
Chairman, I think everyone's spoken enough, in all honesty. It's obvious what the intentions are. Councillor Morris has obviously led the charge at previous meetings on this, and people seem to have listened to her and formed views. So can we go to a vote, please?
Did you want to come back first, Claire?
Thank you. I can summarise the reasons just so members are clear what they're voting on, but I just want to be clear. Obviously, members have explained that they do not consider that there are public benefits that outweigh the less than substantial harm to the heritage assets. But as I mentioned, we do need to also consider as a whole, when looking at that and also the impact on number 5 Little Green Lane, members need to be clear that they're identifying that these adverse impacts essentially significantly and demonstrably outweigh any benefits when we're assessing the application as a whole. So just want to make sure we're clear on that point, please, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, we did have a proposition by Councillor Bedford earlier. Councillor Bedford, would you like to come back again?
Sorry, Chairman, I did want to make one other point which doesn't relate directly to the reasons for refusal, but I think it's important to make. And you'll have to bear with me because my system has completely played up, and even the IT experts haven't managed to get me back onto the system again, so I'm on my iPad. But I did query with the housing officers the level of affordable housing that is being provided as part of this, and pointed out that it was well out of kilter with what was on there. the head of housing came back and gave me several different sets of criteria by which the housing could be calculated in terms of the percentage that was needed under various different assessments. And I do have to say that whilst it's not something we can bring up on this, I wanted to bring it up because we need to ensure that we are getting the maximum amount of affordable housing, whether that be social rented housing or shared ownership housing, that we can possibly manage to get. And we need to make sure that we're getting family houses and not just one-bedroom flats, because that's where we have a dire need. I wanted to flag it now because if we don't flag it now, it will continue through every planning application we have, and we will continue to get the number of family houses that we desperately need undervalued in our planning applications and in the 45% affordable and social housing that we gain. And I think it's important that that sees the light of day and is taken forward on future applications. It's too late to do anything about it now, sadly. But I have made my points quite clear to the head of housing and to planning officers that I do not think this is reasonable, and I know that others do share my views on that we should be maximising what we get. And finally, I'm not going to be silly and pick a fight, because that's not what members of the public are here for. But the day I take my views from any other member of this committee, and certainly the members opposite, will be my last day. My views are my views and nobody else's, and don't try and suggest otherwise.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say at this point that this is the third time that we have heard this application in its various forms. To say that views have been predetermined, I think, is a little unfair, because there have been updates on each and every one of these planning meetings, and we have to take those into consideration. But under the circumstances, I think we will now move to the recommendation that...
Shall I just summarise?
Yeah, okay, sorry, Claire.
From the notes I've made, I understand that essentially three reasons for refusal. The first reason for refusal, I think the exact wording I can circulate to members afterwards, but essentially it's to do with the heritage assets, and it's the fact that we've referenced form, scale and layout, particularly to the western edge, detracting from the overall appearance of the landscape and less than substantial harm. And there was reference to both the conservation area and also the listed buildings, particularly the farm and numbers 1 to 3 Little Green Lane. There's talk about the loss of the hedgerow in relation to the new access and also widening of the vehicle and pedestrian access in Little Green Lane, and associated with that intensification of the use of Little Green Lane. And there was comments about having a detrimental urbanising impact and causing further harm. So those are the points that were raised in relation to the heritage asset to be formulated. Plot 26, is the second reason refusal relates to the impact on number 5 Little Green Lane, and that's specifically in relation to the development on plot 6, and there was reference to its siting and essentially its mass, its design, its proximity to number 5 Little Green Lane, resulting in harm to the amenities of occupiers of that property. The third reason for refusal, whilst not specifically referenced by members, is the fact that in order to... We haven't completed the Section 106 agreement to secure the travel plan and associated financial contributions, so that would need to form a third reason for refusal. But the exact wording I can circulate after the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. I didn't hear the officer mention the Grade 2 listed Croxley House and Well House. They were identified in the Heritage Officer's report as being adversely impacted by the proposals, and therefore I think it's important to include them as well as the other properties mentioned, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Pitt. So, if everyone's happy, Councillor Medhurst.
I want to be very clear. My comments were relating. One of my comments, I agree with in terms of the listed building, was the urbanisation of Little Green Lane, and therefore its detrimental effect on the conservation area and the area of the green. As long as that is picked up as part and parcel of the reasons of review, it's not just the fact you're going to have street lighting; it's the urbanisation. It changes the nature of Little Green Lane completely. and that's the detrimental effect.
Thank you. I'm sure that we can look at the wording before anything is actually gone through. But on that note, could I ask that members would wish to vote on Councillor Bedford's reasons for refusal, or are they happy for this to be seconded by Councillor Lloyd, or that they go with the officer's report, which is recommending approval? So could I see... Could I go for the proposal and the amendment to the proposal? Those in favour of Councillor Bedford's amendment to the proposal, please show.
That's unanimously agreed by the committee that it be refused on the grounds set out in Councillor Bedford and clarified by the officer.
So that is a unanimous decision to refuse this application on the grounds that we have in front of us wording to be displayed back to members. Thank you very much. I'm now going to stand up to give the opportunity for people from Croxley Green, if they wish, to actually leave the meeting, or if they wish to stay, you're quite welcome to do so. Okay, we're happy to carry on. Item 6 then is part retrospective demolition of existing ground floor side extension and balcony and replacement with double-storey side extension, single-storey side and front extension, new porch over front door, landscaping to include a parking space to the front of the property and associated landscaping works at 4 Artichoke Dell, Dog Kennel Lane. Do we have any officer updates on this particular application?
There's no update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We do have 5 speakers on this particular application. Do members of the committee wish to ask any questions of officers before we start? No? Okay. In that case, first I'd like to ask Mr. Michael Hyde, who's speaking against the item, to come to the table. You will have 3 minutes, as you've probably heard before, and you will have a warning of 30 seconds before the end. And you will be timed from when you start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Hyde. I am the chairman of the Friends of Chorleywood Common. We have lodged our objections to the planning application in relation to the proposed parking space. The land beyond the curtilage of number 4 Artichoke Dell that is described as amenity land is registered common land and under the Commons Act 2006 receives protection from development under Section 38 of it. The proposed parking space amounts to development. The purpose of having protection from development is to ensure that our country's stock of common land is not diminished. The pressures of urban life encroaching on our open spaces will be recognised by all of you, and a large space is made up of many small pieces, as in a patchwork quilt. Our first objection to the application is that by having a permanent parking space placed upon it, this piece of common land would be lost in perpetuity. Our second objection is based on the visual impact of a permanent parking space. The Chorleywood Conservation Area requires the visual impact of views of the common and from the common of developments to be taken into account in relation to the preservation of the character of the area. Number 4 Artichoke Dell occupies a prominent position on the common. It already has an existing parking space on the access track opposite the proposed new one that was granted by way leave. This would mean that 2 parking spaces would be available for use by the property, and this compounds the detrimental visual impact of a second parking space, thus causing harm to the conservation area. Landscaping, to whatever degree might be permitted on the
30
common,
seconds remaining.
does not address the issue of the loss of the land itself. It is therefore, with regret, that I urge you to reject this aspect of the planning application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll just wait half a minute for the microphone to be wiped. And then we'll hear from Mr. Barry Griffiths, who's speaking for the item. Mr. Griffiths.
Excuse me, Chair. I spoke to Barry earlier today, and I don't believe he can make it here today.
Right, okay, thank you very much. In that case, could I call Herts County Councillor Phil Williams? Is he here? Because he was down to speak as well. Clearly not. In that case, it's District Councillor John Tankard.
Good evening. I will be speaking on process, not on the actual application itself. As Armed Forces Covenant holder, I wish to express my dismay in the treatment of Barry during this application. The principles of the Forces Covenant is to set the right conditions for society to support and empower veterans who have spent a large part of their adult life in service of this country. But in order to achieve that, we must first embrace the Covenant and all it sets out to achieve. To that point, we at Three Rivers Council need to be seen to be taking the lead in creating processes and establishing principles in dealing with veterans in all manner of circumstances. So, for example, in planning, we need to appreciate that having spent a large proportion of our adult life in the armed services, the principles and often lengthy and complicated process of planning will seem quite alien. This is in contrast to the regimented, direct speaking and proactive just do it world that ex-forces personnel are familiar with. We should make provision to take the time to explain the system, the process and timescale. When veterans have medical records and statements confirming the amendments that they need to make to their properties, we should have a system to provide support and advice on how they achieve their goals, or where a part compromise could be accommodated. The Council will state this is the responsibility of the agent, but to my knowledge, no agents have adopted the Forces Covenant or understand the principles. As such, it is the Covenant holders that need to take the lead in this and establish a process. The Covenant allows us to do this and gives us the ability and indeed responsibility to reach out with special circumstances to this group. This whole situation has been extremely challenging for Barry, but he wishes to make it quite clear that he recognises that no one person is at fault here. Barry, who is used to following process, can see that without process in place, there is no established methodology to work to, and therefore it is difficult for any one person to know how best to act. Essentially, it's the council system at fault here, We need to do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Now, I also have Parish Councillor John Bishop. If you'd like to start, sir, you also have 3 minutes and you'll get a 30-second warning.
Thank you for this chance to speak on behalf of Chorleywood Parish Council about this application. This is a very difficult application for us. The Parish Council is very sympathetic to the applicant and his circumstances, but granting this application will have a negative impact on the wider community and will damage Chorleywood Common, an invaluable resource to that community. In the report, you will have seen the objections of the Conservation Officer, but I don't intend to talk about that at all. The Parish Council's principal concern is the permanent impact of the proposed provision of the parking space and what it will have on the common. Irrespective of who may own it, the area for the parking space is registered as common land, and by granting planning permission to turn this into a parking space, this would result in the permanent loss of the area to the common. We understand that the circumstances of the applicant means he wishes to park closer to his property, but this can be achieved in other ways that will not result in the permanent loss of common. In fact, the solution of providing a licence or easement would be more flexible, as this can be amended if the applicant's needs change. We've raised this with the applicant and stand ready to move forward on it if it will help. With a planning permission, whoever owns this property in the future will have additional rights over this area of the common, whether they need it or not. A licence or easement would be specific to the occupant, and the rights would lapse once the occupant changes. It should be noted that the applicant will still have to apply under Section 38 of the Countryside Rights of Way Act to be able to drive a vehicle into the parking space. There is a concern that this is less likely to be awarded on a permanent basis, as required here, than on a temporary one. When considering commons, the local plan refers to the fact that pressure for apparently minor works, including parking, can erode the character and the sense of public ownership of such areas and will be resisted. This is codified under policy DM11, which says, new vehicle tracks or additional car parking will not be permitted unless there would be a net reduction in the area or number of these features. That is not the case here. In summary, whilst we are very sympathetic to the applicant, we have to say that there are other solutions to the parking issue that would not cause permanent damage to the common, and ask that, whilst the parking space is included in it, you refuse the application so as to protect common land. Thank you very much for hearing me out.
Thank you very much indeed. Matthew, could you differentiate between the two? Clearly, there are two parts to this application, one of which I understand that we can't really look at, but it could be looked at as a separate item overall.
Yes, so obviously we're looking here tonight on the planning merits of the application. Now, obviously, if planning permission is granted, that does not negate the requirement for the applicant to basically overcome and satisfy any other legislation or consents that are required. So, for example, with regards to the parking, yes, if planning permission is granted, that does not mean that the applicant could go ahead and start using it for that purpose. So there's a clear differentiation there between what we're looking at. So obviously from tonight, we're looking at what is the planning harm of a vehicle sitting on that space, because obviously the change of the surface is very limited because it's still going to be turf, but ultimately where the parish council were coming from in terms of licences, easements, that's completely separate to what members should be looking at tonight. It's a consideration obviously outside of planning, 100%, but we should be focused on the planning harm as a result of the parking, and also what the officer recommendation is mainly looking at, and that's actually the single-storey front and side extension. Hopefully that covered your point on that.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. A question, or maybe two questions for officers. Has consideration been given, or have there been any discussions between officers and the applicant about granting a temporary personal permission, like we have in some traveller sites or something like that? And secondly, it's my understanding that personal circumstances of an applicant aren't material to planning considerations. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor. In response, so for the first point about granting a temporary consent, it's officer's opinion that this would be unreasonable because obviously what we're looking at here is an actual physical extension that needs to be built, unless you're referring simply to the parking space.
Yeah, I meant to the parking space. I don't have concern about the other bit, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously, in terms of the parking, officers don't believe there's any harm in that respect. I guess the only way of limiting that reasonably is via other legislation rather than planning, because it would potentially be relatively very difficult for us to enforce against someone parking on their own land, whereas obviously if there was other issues with licences in respect to other legislation, that can be dealt with that way.
Sorry, I meant, could you grant a temporary personal permission for the applicant to use that area for parking, and then requirement that on sale it lapses and it has to be converted back to its current state or something like that?
I personally don't. My opinion is it won't meet the tests for planning conditions, and it wouldn't be reasonable for us to do that. That's just my opinion. And obviously, if we were to condition it in that respect, there needs to be a planning reason why it should just be for a temporary consent, because I appreciate you'll be looking at the personal circumstances, and your second point was obviously in respect of whether or not that is a material consideration. Now, obviously, personal circumstances could well be a material planning consideration, and obviously it was felt in this case that the weight given to that would not outweigh the harm to the conservation area. However, obviously, it's our view that in this particular instance, members could give weight to the personal circumstances, but they would need to believe in themselves that obviously the requirements, the extension's requirements for the occupier's use are exceptional and to outweigh sort of national and local planning policy, and officers don't feel that's the case in this particular instance.
Councillor Rourke.
Thank you. I mean, we've just spent an hour and a half talking about the conservation area in Croxley Green, and obviously this is relevant to everywhere. After reading some emails and listening to what we've heard here and last time, is there any alternative options available that come from, I mean, I don't like to say the parish, but the parish council, have they got options that they can give this guy, that even though we may reject his proposal?
We can only consider what's in front of us tonight. So obviously the recommendation is based on what's submitted. Obviously the applicant can come to us with pre-app advice on aspects, but I think obviously ultimately here, and what I've touched upon before, is in respect to the parking, a lot of that needs to be done outside of planning. If planning permission is granted, yes, but then other legislation will dictate whether or not it could be personal for that particular applicant, or if it can be granted for a period of time. But that's not obviously something that we can consider tonight. You just need to look on the facts of the application in front of us tonight.
Councillor Carroya.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Bishop did mention that the parish could look at an alternative. I appreciate this is not something what is in front of us. But if the applicant was to make a separate application to DEFRA, and the application is only limited to him and is not transferred down to somebody else if the dwelling is sold, it is just restricted to him only. That is something that I'm sure the parish could possibly look at, and they would support that. Thank you.
Councillor Bedford.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm getting myself confused slightly here. If planning permission is granted, does the applicant still need permission to use the space as Village Green under the Countryside Rights of Way Act or any other legislation? Or if they're given that permission, do they still need planning permission to use the land because they're carrying out engineering works on that land? I.e., are both required in order for this development to proceed, or is only one required in order for it to proceed? And if so, which one?
Thank you, Councillor. Both are required. So they'll need to satisfy themselves with all consents. So just like us granting planning permission for an extension wouldn't automatically mean that they could go ahead and build it, because they would require building regulations, and there might be some issues from the building control perspective, which means they physically can't build the extension. So in this case, with regards to the parking aspect, if we grant planning permission, as I said earlier, that doesn't automatically give them the right to park there, because they'll have to enable them to comply with other legislation, and that's ultimately down for the applicant to satisfy.
If I could just come back on that. So, but if planning permission were to be given by this authority, that would be, as we've said, a permanent permission, and therefore it would be up to any agreement made requiring it as Commons land to provide any temporary or personal permission, if that's what the authorities, so DEFRA or so on, believed was the thing to do. So we would still give a permanent permission, and it would be up to the other authorities to give that, to say no, it has to be a temporary permission, personal only to the applicant, if that was the case. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Giles Medhurst.
Yeah, I read this and I thought it was relatively straightforward. But we seem to be bogged down about the, to use the pun, about, it's not been raining recently, thankfully, the parking space. But actually, the harm to the conservation area is the siting, scale and design of the single-storey front and side extension having harm on the conservation area and the Chorleywood Common. As I understand it, that's the basis of the officer report, the basis of the refusal. Now, obviously, what you can't do, I think it's been indicated by the planning officer, you can't make that a personal permission in terms of an extension to an existing building, because anyone could have subsequently purchased that building or inherited or whatever, and how do you therefore require them to remove those bits that cause the harm to the conservation area? It's rather different if you have a temporary permission for a structure in your rear garden that's personal, and we've got one or two of those, to carry on a personal business use for the life of that property, which you then have to remove, but we haven't got that. This is affixed to an actual permanent structure. So to me, it's relatively clear we have no option, because there is a harm to the conservation area, and the circumstances of the applicant don't outweigh that in terms of any public benefit. And therefore, I would support the officer recommendation for refusal.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say the same thing, that it is harm to the conservation area and that we should go to a vote. But, I mean, aside, two issues. I do hope the applicant hasn't been treated unfairly, as was referred to, and I'm sure that hasn't been the case in the application process here in TRDC. And the other thing is there is harm to the common. Having been a parish councillor, but not now, I fully understand the laws around Chorleywood Common, and there would be harm to it ongoing, and that, I think we just need to be aware of that, though it is not a planning decision at the moment. But I agree with Councillor Giles Medhurst that it should be refused on the conservation basis, and we should go to a vote.
Happy to move the refusal as per the officer report, Mr Chairman, and I'm quite sure Councillor Hayward will second that.
Proposer and a seconder for refusing this application. Right, can we go to a vote for that then, please? All those in favour of the application as it stands? The recommendation as it stands, sorry. To refuse. All those against? And those abstaining? Take the officer's recommendation for that. Thank you very much. Moving on, item 7 is one of the items that was withdrawn this evening. So going on to item 8. It's the advertisement consent, installation of 1 non-illuminated totem sign and 3 non-illuminated fascia signs to the western elevation and non-illuminated fascia signs to southern elevation at Travis Perkins, Church Wharf, Church Street, Rickmansworth. Do we have any update on that?
There's no particular update, Chair. Obviously, there's plans before members. This is just an image showing the 3 on the flank elevation, and that is of the totem sign, and that's just the tool station. There's one which shows all of them on the same one. I think you've probably gone to it already. That one. So that shows the other elevation, and there's also just a couple of images. Thought it might be helpful. This is the site as it is now, so obviously the buildings are in situ, so that's one of the elevations there, and then the flank elevation there on the left is the end elevation where the other signs would be, and it's obviously opposite the Premier Inn, has its own totem. There's also some images, if it's of assistance, just of pre-existing. Obviously, building was demolished a while ago, so just if it's useful for members. So the pre-existing building obviously had a number of signs on the building facing the street and also on the perimeter, and there was obviously a lot of storage, etc., in the front of the forecourt. So I think officers' view is that it's been tidied. Obviously, there's no parking area at the front now. It's not got the storage. So hence the officer recommendation for approval, but there's no further updates.
Thank you very much, Claire. Any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Raw?
I must agree that I am a little bit concerned about the totem sign at the front. It is very strong, and I don't know whether we're allowed to suggest it should be like the basic street signs, black and white, I think, personally, because that's quite strong, and I can understand why people are a little bit concerned about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Corroya.
Just seek clarification, if I may. The building is going to be divided into 3 separate trading sections. From the report, it says benchmark, city plumbing, and tool station, and they require 3 signs. Previously, I noted that there were signs there. Did they have 3 signs?
I'm not going to be able to answer that exactly. As I say, we've got some images that I've from kind of a Google Street View in terms to give an indication of previous, but I don't have a record of how many signs there were previous. But there were signs on the building. As I said, there were signs on the gates entering to the site and also on the fencing. There were flagpoles. So there was quite a lot of signage, but I couldn't give you an exact number, Councillor. Just in relation to the previous comment, obviously noted in relation to the colours, obviously we feel that they are acceptable. Obviously it's company colours, obviously it's why that's proposed. It is set back from the road, it's within the site, so we don't believe that it would be prominent, and obviously I'd emphasise that it's not illuminated either.
Well, we do have a speaker for the item, Mr. Simon Millett. If he's here, would he like to step forward and have his 3 minutes? And again, you'll be offered 30 seconds countdown towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. This advert application has your officer's support. The reason the application is on the agenda tonight is due to the Batchworth Community Council's objection. Their formal written response was that the proposal overwhelms the street scene, is inappropriate in the conservation area, the size of the signs is excessive, and they should not be illuminated. In direct response to this, the site is not in a conservation area. None of the signs are illuminated. The only signs visible from the street scene are the totem sign and the 3 signs on the building's west or flank elevation. The totem sign is similar to that at the Premier Inn, which is also illuminated and has been granted consent. The signs on the west elevation have been reduced in size and are now non-illuminated. The signs are modest and the appropriate size to fulfil their function on the blank elevation of a commercial building. They're in no way excessive and are what future customers and delivery drivers will expect to see. As you can see from the images shown, they are less than what was there before the site was developed. There would be no adverse impact upon amenity or public safety, the only 2 considerations for advert applications. As such, I respectfully ask the committee to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We have 2 other speakers. Do we have District Councillor Paula Hiscox here? She's not here. We also have Councillor Diane Barber. She would like to have your 3 minutes. And again, you'll get 30 seconds at the end.
Good evening, Mr Chairman. Batchworth Community Council objects to the proposed signage on this site, and despite having been prominent on the originals, adding new signage to the new building is a retrograde step. We disagree that this signage is relatively modest, as when viewed from the Riverside Drive approach at the roundabout, it is inappropriate, obtrusive and detrimental to the street scene. Policy DM3 says applications will only be supported where they sustain, conserve and enhance the character and appearance of the area. This does neither. It's a huge commercial building, more fitting for an industrial estate. While we totally support the importance of Travis Perkins' contribution to our town's economy, we feel that on a site in this area, disguising its obvious industrial style of architecture would be a significant move towards our aim of improving the area. The timber cladding on the west flank is a huge improvement, and the soft landscaping greatly reduces the visual impact of the bulk and mass of the building. We request that the huge proposed signage on the west flank be refused, as it will harm important views into and out of the area. DM3 C5. Though it may be, as stated in the heritage statement, appropriate for a builder's merchants, it is not appropriate on this site in this area of the town. The majority of customers visiting the site will be tradespeople, known already to the companies and familiar with their locations. The identifying details and logos are clearly visible above the bays on the south elevation for all customers and delivery vehicles entering the site, so large hoardings on the west elevation are totally unnecessary. We have no objection to the totem pole sign on the boundary, on condition the height is not increased, and feel this is appropriate advertising for this location. We would also ask the officers once again to revise and reduce operating times and delivery times out of consideration for any noise nuisance to hotel residents. And we hope the committee will refuse this application, and I thank you for allowing me to speak tonight.
Thank you very much. David, would you like to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Just to respond to a couple of points. There is reference to policy DM3 in terms of preserving or enhancing. Obviously, just to clarify, because the application site is not within the conservation area, policy DM3 is relevant, but not so much in preserving or enhance related to development within conservation areas. It's relevant insofar as it says that development should not be granted if it would adversely affect the setting of a conservation area or views into or out of that conservation area. The conservation area is approximately kind of 40 metres to the northeast of the site, to the other side of Church Street and the Batchworth roundabout. And the view of officers is that essentially the signs, in terms of the signs on the building, they're read against the backdrop of the building, and we do not believe that they would affect the setting of the conservation area or views into or out of that conservation area. And similarly, the totem sign is set back from the road within the site, and we consider that it is acceptable. With regards to operation and delivery hours, obviously this application relates only to the advertisement consent, so that is all we're able to consider this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, the officer recommendation. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bedford.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had my hand up and down so many times while the other speakers were called, I was probably missed. So we've now clarified it's not in the conservation area and it's not illuminated. And just to clarify after the previous speaker, this is about signs. It's not about the size or appearance of the industrial buildings, and it's not about the operating hours. All we are looking at today is some non-illuminated signs. That's correct, isn't it? This part, all the way alongside the canal, from Kings Langley all the way through and out to Mill End and Rickmansworth, the canal is used and has historically been used for industrial purposes. And this is not out of keeping with the canal side locations. This part of Rickmansworth is not a twee village with thatched roofs. It is an area where these sort of things are expected and where we gave planning permission. And to be quite honest, if these signs are non-illuminated, and I just want to check there's no PD into which they can sneak some bulbs in or something like that, because we were caught out on something like that a few years ago. But if that's the case, then I don't see a problem with them whatsoever. Only today I saw the carnage that happened on a road where a low loader missed a turning and caused absolute chaos on a road because it didn't see where it was meant to be turning off. And I think if we can stop that sort of thing happening with people accessing Travis Perkins, whether it's people who've come from a distance in order to drop off bulk goods or people coming from other distances in order to pick them up, then I think that's a good idea. I see no problems with this whatsoever, and I'm very happy with the recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Carroya.
I'd like to second that.
Anybody else? No. Right. In that case, we'll move to the recommendation, which is that advertisement consent be granted. Can I see a show of hands in favour of that? That seems to be unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on. Oh gosh, I've lost it now. Moving on to item 9 then. It's the demolition of existing buildings and menage and construction of detached bungalow with associated parking, hard standing and soft landscaping at Petherick Pastures, Bucks Hill, Sarrett. We do have a speaker for, a speaker against and a parish councillor, but do we have anything to say or add, Matt?
There's no update. Thank you, Chair.
In that case, I may as well go to the first speaker, unless members of the committee have anything to say about the report first. No? Okay, right. The first speaker then is Mr. David Zemi, who's actually against the item. And if he's here. Just like everybody else this evening, sir, you have 3 minutes and you'll get a 30-second countdown. Thank you.
I'm a resident of Bucks Hill and I'm very concerned at this planning application. It appears to be a reheat of 20/2233/FUL, which was rejected because of the harm it would do to the Greenbelt. This revised application appears to contravene paragraphs 143 to 145 of the MPPF. 143, inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. 144, when considering any planning application, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the Greenbelt. These will not exist unless the potential harm to the Greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness or any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. And 145, a local planning authority should regard the construction of new buildings as inappropriate in the Greenbelt. The proposed development does not meet any of the exclusions listed in the MPPF. Its open location and position on top of the hill means that a development here would have a marked negative impact on the essential rural nature of this hamlet, and specifically on the fields and woods next to which it is located. I would further suggest it would also set a very dangerous precedent where anyone with the stables might be tempted to also then apply to turn that into a house. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. But just hang on a moment. There's Sarah running up and down. Okay, secondly, we have Mr. Graham Tompkins, who's speaking for the item. Again, sir, you have 3 minutes, starting when you start. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for letting me speak in support of my planning application tonight. My name is Graham Tompkins and I am the applicant. If you accept the recommendation of the officers, then I will embark on a very significant project with my family in the next 18 months to build our home on the land that we love and have tended and managed for over 20 years. We have looked after our horses and rare breed sheep on this land and maintained it in a way which has retained its essential landscape quality and rural character. That will not change with planning permission for a new home. We have also accepted many changes to the proposed house in terms of its size, height and scale since the first pre-application advice was sought and through the first application. The proposal shows a significant reduction in floor space and volume of buildings on this land, which is previously developed, and the planned new house is a 2-bedroom, single-storey house. These reductions will result in a significant level of improvement in the openness of the Greenbelt, as set out in the officer's report. The submitted plans show a 61% reduction in buildings' floor space on the site and a 51% reduction in volume. We have also agreed to make a substantial contribution towards affordable housing elsewhere within the district, the calculation being in line with the Council's own assessment. Although the land is Greenbelt, in terms of national and local planning policy guidance, the proposal is actually a form of appropriate development, as it relates to the redevelopment of previously developed land and would not worsen the openness of the Greenbelt. The approval of this revised application will not set an unhelpful precedent, as previously said, for your authority. The Council has only metres away in Old House Lane previously granted approval for a 4-bedroom dwelling to replace equestrian facilities in 2017 and again in a revised form in 2019. Other benefits will flow from an approval here. We will be planting more trees and improving the biodiversity on the land. The new building will be far more sustainable in design and construction terms than of the existing structures. The house will only be seen in the context as a backcloth of a piece of woodland as a timber-clad barn and will merge into the background visually. I have noted you have received a few objections to the application and I consider they have misunderstood the planning policy context to this proposal. There will be no impact whatsoever on the adjacent woodland or the public right-of-way within which is not within the application site. The officer's recommendation is clear-cut and I hope you can accept and resolve to grant planning permission. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we have Parish Councillor John Gill. I can see you sitting right over there in the corner there, John. So again, you have your 3 minutes and you'll get 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, committee members. My name is John Gill and I'm representing Sarah Parish Council as one of the statutory consultees asked for this application to be called into committee. Our objection to the application before you from Petherick Pastures for the demolition of existing buildings and menage and the construction of a detached bungalow with associated parking, hard standing and soft landscaping was on the basis that this would create a new dwelling in the Greenbelt with no special circumstances cited, and construction of a new dwelling would have a significant impact on the openness of the Greenbelt compared to the existing buildings and therefore results in inappropriate development. A similar application was made for Petherick Pastures last December, but for a 3-bed dwelling. Sarah Parish Council also objected to this on the grounds of inappropriate development in the Greenbelt with no special circumstances, and the application was refused by Three Rivers. This new application has been reduced from a 3-bed to a 2-bed dwelling with reduced form and scale, and the owners have volunteered to enter a Section 106 agreement to pay a £62,700 off-site contribution towards affordable housing, thereby seeking to address the reasons for refusal in the first application and the need for very special circumstances to be demonstrated. Sarah Parish Council's view is that the changes do not mitigate the reasons for refusal. If a new two-bed dwelling in the Greenbelt had been originally proposed, this would also have been refused on the same grounds. Reducing its size and scale does not change the fact that it is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt with no special circumstances given. A voluntary Section 106 contribution and this approach to move to a negotiation on size is not appropriate. Furthermore, the site remains unsuitable for a substantial development due to the lack of essential services
30 seconds remaining.
And transport infrastructure. Sarah Parish Council therefore kindly requests the Planning Committee refuse this application on the basis it represents inappropriate development in the Greenbelt with no special circumstances demonstrated to justify a new dwelling. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Adam, would you like to come?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to cover a few points mentioned from the speakers. In respect of dealing with Greenbelt applications, the correct approach is to first consider, when looking at the MPPF, is whether or not the development proposed would fall within paragraphs 145 and 146. Within paragraph 145, the erection of new buildings, there are a number of exceptions to inappropriate development within the Greenbelt, one of which includes the redevelopment of previously developed land, and that's caveated by the fact that the development itself should not have a greater impact on the openness of the Greenbelt than the existing development that exists on the land. So the approach taken by the officer here is that the equestrian established use of the land does fall within previously developed land as defined within the MPPF. Consequently, it could fall within one of the exceptions within paragraph 145. Again, subject to the fact that it shouldn't have a greater impact than the existing development in respect of openness. Now, in respect of the previous application, that was refused because it was considered that there was a greater impact on the openness than the existing development. Following some changes made from the last submission in respect of the removal of a further bedroom, a gabled projection, a reduction in the height by 0.6 metres, and a further removal of another building within the site towards the rear, it's considered this time that there is not a greater impact on the openness of the Greenbelt. Therefore, the conclusion is that it would be an appropriate form of development, and automatically that would mean that there is no harm to openness. If it was considered that there was a greater impact, then it automatically would mean that it's inappropriate development, and then you'd also need to consider the impact on openness. So I know a few speakers have obviously highlighted the fact that it's inappropriate development, but the officer's view is that it does fall within one of the exceptions within the MPPF. In terms of precedents, I think one of the speakers was mentioned, obviously, if anyone had a stable block, that could allow the ability for a new dwelling. But as I said earlier, it does need to be a balance with respect to whether or not the harm is greater than what's there currently. So clearly, if there was a very small stable, this wouldn't obviously enable a new dwelling for various factors. Affordable housing, it's not voluntary, it's a requirement as part of CP4, the core strategy. As it's a new dwelling, a net gain of 1, there is an automatic requirement that they pay for a commuted sum, and the applicants have entered into this agreement. So if it's approved, it will need to be delegated in order for that agreement to be secured before we grant planning permission. Hopefully that's covered just a few points.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Councillor Morris.
Thank you. I thought I heard the applicant say, but I'm not 100% sure, that his family had bred sheep on the land. If I did hear that, then I'm wondering whether this does genuinely fall into equestrian use, or if some of the buildings concerned have been part of the sheep farming business or whatever. And I just wondered what inquiries officers have made about the use of each of these buildings and satisfied themselves that there is total equestrian use here. And I'm looking at the wording in 7.2.4 where it says that land which is or was occupied by a permanent structure, including the curtilage of the developed land. So presumably it's not just the buildings, it's the fields as well. One has to look at the use of that. use of that. Can someone clarify that, please?
In respect to the established use of the site, the primary use, in the officer's opinion, is equestrian. There's a menage that was permitted, which obviously enables equestrian uses to take place on the land. Furthermore, there was a stabling block that was permitted, and that was, again, for the stabling of horses rather than grazing. Whilst the applicant mentioned there was grazing of sheep, that potentially is a limited part of the use of the land. However, it is our view that the primary use, the main use of that land, is for equestrian purposes. Therefore, any other uses which may meet the definition of agriculture does not. It would only be a de minimis element, because clearly, by virtue of the fact there being a menage, stabling for horses, it would meet the definition of equestrian rather than for agriculture.
Councillor Raw.
Looking at 3.3, it says the proposed 2-bedroom dwelling has been reduced in width, height and depth from the previous 3-bedroom dwelling scheme. So obviously the officers feel that's okay to give planning permission, but can I ask what happens if it's built and they decide to put an extension on, further development, and of course it begins to increase in size towards the previous planning application? Thank you.
In response, if planning permission was approved, the applicant would need to build in accordance with the plans permitted. If there was any deviation from that, that would be an enforcement matter, and obviously we have powers to issue enforcement notices to require it to be built in accordance with the plans. As part of the recommendation, one of the conditions removes permitted development rights. So when the house is built, any further extension would be controlled and they would have to apply for planning permission. So hopefully that provides a little bit of control over future development.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. I know this area very well, as it's my daily walk with the dog across the footpaths of Newhall Farm, which is just across the valley as you look up here. A lot of the focus on this explanation on this planning application has been street scene and openness, but all taken from the Bucks Hill side. And if you take it from the opposite side of Chorleywood Bottom, you've got a beautiful view of the valley, of which this is actually quite a significant site that is extremely visible. Can you clarify, please? It talks about protected trees and that the property had to move a little bit to protect those trees. Did I get that right?
Yeah, the building has shifted away from the boundary with the woodland, which it sits adjacent to.
So therefore, I would argue that therefore makes it more prominent in this open space. I'm also concerned that it refers to a ridge height, which is not considered significant, of nearly a metre, 0.9. Again, we have I know from previous experience on planning, 10 inches can be significant, but in this case, I think a ridge height increase of a metre when you're looking across the valley does make the property significantly bigger. And it's for those reasons that I just don't see how the openness is really maintained when you have a building that's moved further into its field away from the hedges and it's of a higher ridge height.
Anybody else got anything to say? Councillor Lloyd.
Yeah, having run from Croxley and seen the very view that the councillor mentioned, and I do know the location, that it's a difficult balance, but it definitely would have an impact from the Sarrett side of the valley. I can concur.
Anybody else? No? Well,
I would like to, sorry Chair, on that basis I would like to move refusal, that it is harmful to the openness of the Greenbelt area.
Just on that point, it seemed to me that your views in respect of the impact of the views from lower in the valley were more so to do with the impact on the character than the greenbelt, because as I said at the start, how you look at greenbelt is whether or not it fits within the exceptions, unless you're considering that by virtue of its ridge height, it does have a greater impact on the openness of the greenbelt than the existing developments. I think we just need to tighten that up.
Sorry, yes, that's what I was implying, because at the moment, the buildings, as you look across them, yes, they are a mix of buildings and they're sort of tucked into the trees, but this is going to move more prominently into its area and of a higher ridge height. And I've got pictures on my phone. If you look across the valley, it is quite a very open space, and it will be very significant.
Who's first? Councillor Giles Medhurst.
Can I just have clarification? I thought the officer had said there had been a lowered ridge height from the previous one, so I'm now being told it's a higher ridge height. So could we just have clarification, please, as to what exactly is the current plan we're looking at? Is this smaller than the previous three-storey? Reading the report, it says it is, and it says it's lower. And
sorry, if my understanding's right, and please correct me, there's a lot of comparison to the previous application, which was refused. So it's lower than the previous, but it's higher than the existing. It's 1 metre higher than the existing.
In that case, could the officer please clarify, in terms of the photographs that are part of the plan application, which ones of these the new building would replace, please, for clarification? And could he indicate, therefore, the difference between what is currently there and obviously can be viewed by Councillor Haywood when she's walking her dog, and the rest of us?
Okay, just to clarify, so as Councillor Haywood mentioned, it's lower than the previous refuse scheme, but the new building is still higher than the existing building by 0.6 metres, sorry, 0.9 metres. And in respect of where it is on the site, it's going to be, it's just, you scroll across, sorry, Adam. Keep going, long photos. So that initial building at the front, that's predominantly where the new dwelling's going to be sitting. So it's the most furthest forward building towards Bucks Hill. And then as you go down the site, the buildings, obviously, as you can see on the plan, gradually reduce by virtue of the slope.
Councillor Morris.
There appears to be a line above that when you look at that. I have to go back to the plan I have here.
Councillor Morris.
I'd like to second Councillor Haywood's proposal, please.
2 lines.
Can I, sorry, Chair, if there is a move, there needs to be some consideration if it is refused, that obviously we need to add the absence of a legal agreement covering the affordable housing contribution.
Well, clearly that wouldn't be part of it, would it? If it's refused, then there would not be a contribution to affordable housing.
It would just be an additional reason for refusal.
Additional reason for refusal. Okay, so we do have a proposition from Councillor Haywood, seconded by Councillor Morris, that we refuse this on the grounds of wording to be agreed. Is that a fair comment?
Please.
Okay.
Because
So basically, from listening, basically the development proposed, by virtue of its height exceeding the height of the existing buildings on site, and by virtue of its size, would result in a development that would be more harmful, will have a greater harmful impact than on the openness of the greenbelt than the existing development. Therefore, it would be inappropriate development, as it wouldn't meet the exceptions of paragraph 145. And by virtue of its inappropriateness, there would also be harm to openness by virtue of its height and size, and obviously its bulk from views towards across the valleys. And basically there's no circumstances put forward that would result in very special circumstances that would outweigh the inappropriateness of the development and harm to openness. And obviously those wordings can be circulated. And the second reason would be in the absence of a legal agreement tying and securing the affordable housing contribution.
Okay, thank you for that, Matthew.
Sorry, I just wanted to include, I don't know if you mentioned it, but the fact that it's sited further out from its boundary makes it more prominent.
Yeah, I can include height, size, and the fact that it's been slightly pushed away from that boundary.
Okay, on that basis, could I possibly have a show of hands for the refusal for this particular application? All those in favour of Councillor Hayward's proposal? All those against? Those abstaining? So therefore,
four, 3 against, and 4 abstentions.
Councillor Hayward's amendment has been approved.
Yeah, been carried.
So that's been refused. Okay, thank you. Moving on then, we have single-storey rear extension and associated internal alterations and alterations to existing outbuilding to be used as an office at number 4 Salisbury Lane, Chorley Wood. Is there any updates, Adam?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just one update. We've had one further letter of objection received since the agenda was published. It raises similar concerns to those already summarised in the report regarding the impact on the conservation area, impact on the neighbouring wall, inappropriate roof pitch and height, and loss of light.
If a speaker on this who's against the item, and we also have a parish councillor who spoke earlier. So could I ask Valerie Steele to come forward and state the case, please? Thank you very much. You'll be timed when you start. You get 3 minutes and 30-second countdown.
Thank you. I'm Valerie Steele and I live next door at number 5. The property lies within the Chorley Wood Common Conservation Area. This end terrace is part of the historical Chorley Wood House estate and was built in 1880 in the original village. My objections are that the single-storey rear extension fails to preserve the character of the conservation area. This further extension would go beyond the building line of the other original 4 cottages in this row and change the look of these cottages. The pitch, height and configuration are of concern. It is a typical design more akin to permitted development with lean-to roof and tall bifold doors to the rear, with the bifold doors being quite tall for this property, given that a standard door height is just 2 metres. The amended ground floor plan drawing suggests that the boundary wall is now behind the boundary line, but the reality is that any footings required to build out this extension will affect the boundary wall, and this would require rebuilding. This by default would need planning permission, which is not considered in any part of this application. I also noticed that the proposed rear elevation drawing has not been updated. This is also a party wall issue, as is the work on the outhouse of number 4, which lies immediately behind the back of the courtyard wall of number 5. I believe that the extension will affect rights to light to the neighbouring property. If this application were allowed, this new work would straddle about 50% of the length of the existing boundary wall, at its lowest 2.4 metres high, a good metre taller than the boundary wall, and at its highest an increased ridge height of over 3 metres, which will be quite overpowering. The application says it will not affect the neighbours. As the next-door neighbour, part of the 5 cottages in the original terrace, will have the opposite effect, as if allowed there will be loss of light to the kitchen, dining room and in the small courtyard. They face north, and as the wall and courtyard are approximately 2.5 metres long, will further restrict the present very few hours of light during both summer and winter. The building work would also result in noise and dirt in very close proximity to the kitchen windows and door of number 5 and in the very small space of the courtyard, which will be out of use for the months of the building. For all these reasons, loss of light, inappropriate design in a conservation area, lack of detail in the application, I do hope this application will be refused. If not refused, then because of the close proximity of number 5 to restrict working hours to Monday to Friday 8 till 5 only and to erect temporary screening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Bishop, it's your turn again.
Thank you for giving me this chance to speak again on behalf of Chorleywood Parish Council. It seems unusual to be speaking to you about such a small extension, but the nature of these cottages makes the impact of even this very small extension really quite severe on the neighbouring properties. These cottages have very small courtyards to the back of them that is, in effect, the only private garden that they have. Number 4 is positioned at the southwestern end of the terrace. The garden of number 5, immediately next door to the applicant's site, and we've just heard from the resident there, has a particularly small courtyard due to the sheds at the back of the properties, including the one, by the way, belonging to number 4, which is being turned into a home office. And that intrudes into number 5's courtyard as it is. The proposed extension to the rear of number 4, though small, will extend about halfway down the length of the rear garden of number 5, and due to its length and the increase in height compared to the existing wall, will have an inordinate impact on the light that the back of number 5 and its courtyard will receive. This will be particularly true during winter, spring and autumn days, but I think because of the size, it'll even be true in the summer. CP12 makes it clear that in development, maintaining residential amenity is a key need, and this is supported by the requirement to consider the loss of light to neighbouring properties in the design criteria laid out in Appendix 2 of the Development Management Policies. In light of this, and I don't mean a pun there, we would ask that this application be refused, or if the committee is unminded to approve, that they at least carry out a site visit to see the impact on number 5 before deciding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Adam, do you have any questions? Or no? Members of the committee? I see no questions. So in that case, we may well... Oh, sorry, Councillor Morris.
I don't have a question, but if this is approved, I would ask that a condition be added to remove permitted development rights for Class A extension and Class E rear outbuildings in view of the small amenity space currently existing and being reduced. Thank you.
Councillor Hayward and Councillor Bedford.
I was just going to request, is there an appetite for a site visit? I find these are very small cottages and Salisbury Lane is very tight at the best of times, but so it's hard to sort of really judge. I know the officers will have formed an opinion, but as our duty, would it be worth doing a site visit to look at this in more detail?
Do other members have an opinion on that? Is it Caroy? Yeah, Councillor Bedford wishes to speak.
I would like to second that. I think looking at the property would give us a better understanding.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Bedford, you wish to speak?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I realise that this is a very tight set of houses here. It's very obvious, even driving down Salisbury Lane, as I used to do reasonably often, that they are small cottages on small plots, and they are close together, but that's what they've always been. And I tend to think that the extension that is being suggested is modest and not unreasonable in the current climate. And I think if the suggestion of withdrawing the PD rights was taken forward, that this would be acceptable, and I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Do I have a second for the mover of the recommendation? Councillor Giles Methurst.
Yeah, I would happily second that. I'm just double checking what the conditions were in terms of the building workers was being suggested. I'm just scrolling down to find if there is a constraint on that. I'm struggling to see. It does still mention Saturdays. The suggestion is, of course, obviously to remove that. Would officers, in mindful of how tight this particular property is, given the photograph, and I really don't think a site visit is going to show us much more than what we can physically see here, and also, given the current climate, it would be 1 in, 1 out, 1 in, 1 out, 1 in, 1 out, I suspect, in order for a site visit on that particular property. But could we remove the restricted so there is no works on the Saturday as well, please? What would the officer's view would be on that?
So the working hours are controlled by other legislation. So the informative number 2 sets out that working hours tend to be controlled by the Control of Pollution Act, and that's where those come from. I guess if members consider it would be reasonable and necessary to make the development appropriate and wish to put on a planning condition, if members want to justify that, we can do it. If the applicant does not agree with it, they have the ability to appeal it.
We're talking about 4 hours on a Saturday. I think it's not unreasonable, given how constrained this site is and how the other cottages are very constrained, that we actually do put a condition on, and hopefully the developer will say, fine, I'll go along with it for the sake of 4 hours on a Saturday.
Councillor Morris.
Yeah, the neighbour who spoke against also requested temporary screening. So if something could be added about that, I think that would be helpful.
I think we could put an informative on asking for that to happen, but I don't think that's something we could insist upon or enforce.
Correct.
Councillor Bedford.
Thank you. Certainly I didn't move the recommendation with the suggestion that we put temporary screening on there, and I would not be happy if that is just added on. That can be an informative, that cannot be a condition. It is not reasonable and it is not enforceable in my mind, and therefore it doesn't fulfil the criteria for being a reasonable planning condition.
But you would be happy with the working hours to exclude a Saturday?
Yeah, I'm happy with the working hours, and I'm happy with the withdrawal of permitted development rights. I think that's only reasonable in a plot of that size, but I think anything other than that is starting to be not reasonable, and so we're verging on the not enforceable as well. Let's just, the quicker it's done, the less it's hanging around. If someone's working next to you, you want it done and gone.
Okay, so there we have a proposition. Councillor Giles Meadows, Councillor Bedford has moved it, and Councillor Giles Meadows has seconded it with an informative of some screening. And did you want to carry on with the proposition of not working on a Saturday?
I think we could ask the applicant if they would be mindful to consider that as part and parcel of the process in terms of neighbourliness, rather than put it on as a condition.
Okay, so we can put an informative on that basically essentially asks if they would consider temporary screening and asks to consider limiting or not working on a Saturday. We can add those as informative. So they're not enforceable, but they're a request.
Okay, well, the officer recommendation is that planning permission be granted. Could I see a show of hands in favour of that?
That with the PD reduction condition.
And those abstaining. So planning permission is granted. Right. So, I'm lost now. Number 11. It doesn't want to work. Come on. Sorry. Number 11, demolition of existing dwelling and construction of replacement 3-storey dwelling and basement level accommodation, raised terrace to the rear, front balcony and swimming pool to rear at 45 Gallows Hill, Abbots Langley. Do we have any officer update?
There's no update, Chair. Obviously, the plans are just going through on the screen ahead. So that's the street scene existing at the top and proposed. And obviously, just to clarify, as set out in the report, officers are not objecting in principle to the demolition of the bungalow and erection of a 2-storey replacement dwelling. There's specific concerns regarding the mass, the bulk, the depth, in terms of both impact on character and appearance, but also impact on neighbouring amenity So the application is recommended for refusal on those two grounds, but there's no updates, Chair.
Thank you very much. Anything from the committee members? No? Okay, well, we have somebody speaking for the item. Mr. Matthew Henry, if you'd like to come forward and speak. I can't see anyone. Okay, therefore we don't have anyone to speak on behalf of the applicant or the applicant himself. So have we any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Bedford.
I feel otherwise we may end up with nothing being said at all. I mean, this isn't in my ward, but it's I know the site very well. I think, like the officers, I have no problem with the principle of replacement. The houses on Gallows Hill are not, they're very nice houses, but they're not spectacular or listed or anything else. But this is just an application which is just too big. And I think that really says it all. I mean, the reasons are given in nice planning language within the recommendation at 8. But it is quite big for where it is, and it's going to feel very big to the people, particularly next door. And they're going to see an awful lot of building there. I have no problems with the style. I have no problems with doing something a bit different at all. I think it's very nice, but I'd just like to see it a bit smaller, please.
Anything else from members of the committee? Councillor Morris?
I'm happy to move the recommendation for refusal.
Do we have a seconder? 2 seconders. Okay, so could I have a show of hands for the recommendation from the officers that the permission be refused? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on, item 12. Single-storey side and rear extensions, conversion of garage, alterations to fenestration, including bay window and front porch at 18 Follett Drive, Abbots Langley. Adam, do we have an update at all?
No.
Okay. Members of the committee, Councillor Bedford.
Thank you, Chairman. I note the reason why this has come to committee. This is within my ward, but is much further away from me than the Gallows Hill house, but I still know it reasonably well. It's a cul-de-sac of semi-detached houses, a number of which have had similar extensions and conversions carried out there, and in this case I see absolutely no problems with it at all. It is what is carried out on semis all over 3 rivers, and I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? 2 seconders. I'll move the recommendation then that planning permission is granted. I see a show of hands. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And that, I believe, is the end of the meeting. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.